Brock, you're replaceable. Stop thinking you're important. Let's see who will really be replaced this week.
Gavin Cross was already smirking when I walked into the glass conference room, chin lifted, arms crossed, wearing the expression of a man who thought the entire floor existed for his applause. He tapped his pen against the table, slow and theatrical, like he'd been waiting for the perfect moment to remind everyone why the CEO's nephew now sat at the head of the room. "Brock, you're easily replaceable. Don't start thinking you matter," he said. His smile sharpened. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. The sentence ricocheted off the glass walls, landing with a cold, metallic clarity. For a long breath, the entire room froze. Then came the chuckles. Those nervous little sounds employees make when they want job security more than integrity. Gavin basked in it, posture relaxed, ego swelling like a balloon someone should have popped years ago. Moments like this are why stories here hit different. This isn't a channel for casual viewers. If you're someone who thinks deeper than the crowd, who listens between the lines, then go ahead and subscribe. When you enter this space, you get more than just stories. You get strategy, perspective, and insight, maybe even a little harder to replace. And you know what I would do in this moment? I didn't react. Not externally. Anyway, inside. A cold shock hit hard and spread slow, like winter air creeping under a closed door. But I kept my face still. I lowered my eyes, wrote down his exact sentence in my notebook, and treated it the way I'd treat a sudden market dip calmly, clinically, storing it for a more meaningful moment. Then, buzz. My phone vibrated in my pocket, once, then again, persistent enough to slip past my composure. While Gavin rambled on about innovation, I tilted the screen just enough to read the preview, a message from one of my oldest institutional clients: "If you ever leave the firm, Brock, I'm leaving with you." The timing was absurd, precise, almost cosmic. I locked the screen, quietly exhaled, and looked back at Gavin still performing, still oblivious. And of course, I still had full system access until day's end. It was only a meeting, not a firing. He hadn't thought past the insult. I closed my notebook, leaned back slightly, and let the cold settle into resolve. All right, I thought. Let's see who's really replaceable. I wish I could say Gavin's jab in the glass room was the first time someone tried to shrink my work down to nothing. But that would be generous fiction. The truth is, his insult only pressed on a bruise that had been forming for years, one I learned to hide behind spreadsheets, compliance notes, and a polite smile that had become muscle memory. As I walked back to my desk that morning, the sting of his words settled into a familiar ache, the kind that doesn't make you angry immediately. It just makes you tired. Deep inside the chest, tired. My mind drifted back to the nights when the firm's lights flickered past 2 in the morning, and it was always my reflection staring back at me from the monitor, not Gavin's. I remembered the market swing in late Q2, the one that threatened to wipe out half the mid-cap portfolio. While Gavin was at a networking dinner bragging about stability metrics, I was the one recalibrating exposure ratios and hitting refresh like my life depended on it. The next morning, Gavin strutted into the meeting as if he alone had held back a financial hurricane. People clapped. I stayed quiet. Quiet was safer. And then there were the mysterious model discrepancies, those risk algorithms Gavin insisted he understood, until they threw off numbers so chaotic they looked like modern art. I fixed those too, smoothing the jagged edges of his incompetence before clients ever saw the danger. But the memory that bit deepest was the one the company buried hardest. 2 institutional clients' combined assets, just over $40 million, were nearly obliterated because Gavin hit approve on a rebalancing request he didn't bother to read. He thought automatic meant risk-free. It took me 12 hours, 3 compliance overrides, and 2 direct calls to the custodial desk to unwind the damage. The next day, leadership thanked Gavin publicly for his quick response. My name was never mentioned. Of course it wasn't. Nepotism doesn't like sharing a spotlight. As I sat at my desk now, the memory made me laugh under my breath, quiet, bitter, but honest. Replaceable, I thought. Sure. I've been replacing his mistakes for years. The humor was short-lived. A dull heaviness followed, settling in my chest the way exhaustion sometimes does after a long run earned, but unwelcome. It wasn't anger, not yet, just that old mixture of sadness and resignation that comes from realizing your loyalty had been misinterpreted as expendability. Still, beneath that heaviness, a sharper awareness began to form, a clarity. Gavin didn't just underestimate me, he didn't even understand what he'd done or what his negligence had almost cost the firm. And for the first time, I felt the quiet shift of something breaking free inside me. If you understand the true meaning of this passage, please comment one sentence. I walked back to my desk without a single pair of eyes following me. No one asked if I was all right, and I didn't expect them to. Offices have a way of teaching people to look away from the person who just took a blow. Self-preservation is stronger than sympathy. The silence that wrapped around me wasn't hostile. It was indifference polished, professional, and familiar. I sat down, adjusted my chair, and let the quiet settle over me like dust after a slammed door. For a moment, I just breathed, slowly, evenly. The cold shock from the meeting had passed, leaving behind a strange steadiness, the kind that arrives once the worst part is already over. I opened my laptop and pulled up the master dashboard, the list of every institutional and high-net-worth client I'd shepherded for years. Rows of names, risk levels, allocation notes, my real work, the part nobody in that conference room seemed to notice. I clicked into my portfolio notes, scanning the alerts I had set weeks earlier, market tremors, sector overexposure, liquidity shifts, things that mattered far more than Gavin's theatrics. My fingers hovered as I noticed something odd. One of the risk flags I'd marked in red, an early warning tied to a vulnerable derivatives position, was no longer active. At first, I wondered if I had dismissed it by accident. Then I checked the system log. It wasn't me. Gavin had manually dismissed the alert. Of course he had. The timestamp aligned perfectly with last month's KPI review just hours before his performance evaluation. He probably didn't want anything on the record that could make him look less effective. A slow exhale pushed from my chest. Not angry, just disappointed. This was the same reckless behavior that had almost caused that $40 million disaster the firm pretended never happened. The same blind confidence, the same refusal to understand risk beyond whatever buzzword he'd parroted that week. If I hadn't been checking the numbers regularly, that dismissed flag could have spiraled into another catastrophe, and no one would have known how close they came, because I always cleaned it up quietly. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the truth land with calm precision if I walked out of this firm tomorrow. The people on that list, the ones who trusted me more than the logo on the wall, would have no one left watching their blind spots. Their portfolios weren't just numbers. They were pensions, foundations, livelihoods. The realization didn't burn. It simply settled, cool and solid, like a final piece clicking into place. The room around me felt still, almost suspended. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear, and in that clarity, a quiet thought surfaced, measured, inevitable. It was time to make my next move. Most people stop here, but the truth lies in the next part. The stillness around my desk gave me room to think, really think, not the hurried calculations of market shifts or the quiet triage of Gavin's mistakes, but something slower, firmer, more decisive, the kind of thinking that doesn't spark from anger, but from clarity, and clarity, I'd learned, is a sharp instrument when used correctly. I opened my contacts, scrolled past the usual internal numbers, and pressed the one I rarely used, my personal attorney. He answered on the second ring, his voice steady, the way someone sounds when dealing with clients who've seen too much and tolerated even more. I laid out my question calmly. What are the legal parameters for clients transferring their portfolio management if I resign? He didn't even pause. Brock. Clients are free to move their assets at any time. It's personal choice, completely legal, and fully protected. You're in the clear 100%. The simplicity of the answer settled into me like a stone clicking into its rightful place. No loopholes, no complications, no hidden traps. Just clean, unambiguous freedom. And with that, the next step became obvious. I scrolled again, this time to a number that had been sitting quietly in my phone for nearly 2 years, a competing firm that had tried to recruit me long before Gavin learned how to pronounce risk-adjusted return. I hadn't called them back then because I still believed loyalty mattered. I still believed effort would be recognized. I still believed leadership saw value in competence. I wasn't that naive anymore. I dialed. They picked up in less than a minute when I said my name. The tone on the other end shifted, immediately warm, eager, almost relieved. Within 11 minutes, I had a scheduled meeting, a compensation outline, and a clear message. We've wanted you for a long time. Brock. But the real twist came next, before hanging up. The recruiter lowered her voice slightly and said, "To be transparent, we rejected a partnership deal with your firm last year. We didn't want to work under Gavin Cross, internally. He's known as a liability." I didn't smile, but something quiet inside me did. A small, controlled exhale. The universe, it seemed, had been dropping hints long before today. From there, my exit plan formed with the ease of a well-rehearsed strategy. Nothing dramatic, nothing destructive, just honesty direct, simple, factual, at noon. I drafted a discreet message to a select group of long-term clients. I will be leaving the firm at the end of the week. I will update you on my next professional step. No persuasion, no pressure, no promises, just truth. The replies came faster than I expected, one by one. The messages lit up my screen like quiet beacons. When you go, Brock, my portfolio goes with you. Wherever you land, we'll follow. You've earned our trust, not the firm. Their words didn't spark triumph or bitterness, only resolve, quiet, steady, and final. This detail has appeared once before. Smart viewers will remember. The next morning arrived with a strange, electric quiet, the kind of stillness that settles right before a long-awaited shift. I sat at my desk earlier than usual, the office still half asleep, lights humming faintly overhead. My hands moved steadily across the keyboard as I began the process I'd rehearsed in my mind all night, sending formal intent to transfer notices to my largest institutional clients. Each message was crafted with clinical precision, no embellishment, no persuasion. Simply a clear statement of my resignation and a reminder that they were free to transition their portfolios however they chose. It was the most honest communication I'd sent in years. When the first reply came in under 3 minutes, I felt my heartbeat pick up, not racing, but tightening slightly, like a pulse before a market swing. The message was short, almost startlingly direct. "Where are you going, Brock? We need to send the paperwork over." I hadn't even stood up from my chair yet. Before I could type a response, another message appeared, then another, and another. Every notification hit my screen like a soft tap on glass, persistent, distinct, impossible to ignore. Clients who usually took hours or even days to respond were replying instantly, asking the same question in nearly identical words. "Tell us your new firm so we can prepare the transfer forms." A few even added, "We're moving regardless. Just tell us where." The speed of it all sent a faint rush through me, not panic, not triumph, something in between. Anticipation, and beneath that, a deep determination to stay steady. I reminded myself that this was still business, and business required composure. By midday, the advisory transfer forms began arriving, first in single digits, then in clusters. Files with asset totals that made even seasoned executives inhale sharply were now tagged with my name, flagged for movement to my new firm. I reviewed each one the same way I handled extreme market volatility, with slow breathing, quiet focus, and a mind trained to stay level. Meanwhile, Gavin walked past my desk twice, oblivious to everything unfolding under his nose. He was too busy charming a pair of junior analysts and bragging about leading the next phase of portfolio strategy. The irony would have been amusing if I'd had the energy to indulge it. The truth was, I felt calm, not cold, not hardened, just centered, like I was adjusting a portfolio through a turbulent week, shifting allocations with deliberate, measured confidence. Every incoming form, every email, every client confirming their intent to follow, it all played out like a market trend I'd already predicted. By the time the clock hit 4, my screen held enough transfer confirmations to wipe out the better part of Gavin's entire book of business. And still, he didn't have a clue. I closed my laptop softly, steady as ever, letting the quiet anticipation settle around me. The migration had begun, silent, swift, and unstoppable. Friday mornings usually carried a predictable rhythm: coffee, market briefs, quiet hums of conversation. But that day, the atmosphere felt tight, like the air was waiting for something to snap. I logged into the firm's dashboard, out of habit, expecting the usual slow crawl of metrics. Instead, the entire screen lit up with warning indicators, red bars, red triangles, red percentages, the kind of red that makes seasoned advisors sit back in their chairs. At first, I thought it might be a glitch, Systems occasionally hiccuped before the quarterly patch, but when I refreshed, the red expanded. Then, in the top right corner, a notification appeared: Institutional Client Transfer Request, 200 AUM. That number didn't just blink, it detonated. For a moment, I simply stared at it, letting the implications fold into place with slow, deliberate clarity. The client in question wasn't just large, they were one of the crown jewels Gavin boasted about in every leadership meeting. The irony was almost poetic. Somewhere behind me, a chair scraped violently across the floor, then another, and then, like clockwork, Gavin's voice shot through the office. Who touched the dashboard? Who changed something? What's going on? He wasn't asking questions. He was flailing. His footsteps slapped against the floor as he moved from desk to desk in frantic loops, scanning screens he didn't understand, demanding explanations from analysts who looked just as confused as he did. The tension in the room spiked, stretching thin across cubicles and monitors. Meanwhile, I continued packing up my desk, carefully folding documents, unplugging my charger, sliding my notebook into my bag with quiet, practiced motions. Each click of a drawer closing felt like punctuation at the end of a long, exhausting sentence. Gavin eventually noticed me, mid-chaos, and puffed himself up like a cornered peacock. He raised his voice loud enough to echo across the floor. Everyone stay calm. It's just a system error. Clients don't leave overnight. This has nothing to do with anyone. The pause before anyone was almost comedic, a desperate attempt to sound in control while his empire leaked out through the cracks. I didn't look at him at first. I just zipped my bag, stood, and finally met his eyes with the kind of calm that makes insecure men nervous. Then I let the corner of my mouth lift, subtle and sharp. "You might want to check who dismissed that risk alert last month," I said quietly. Not loud, not theatrical, just factual. The words hit harder than volume ever could. Silence rippled outward. A few analysts glanced up, eyes widening as they remembered the alert Gavin brushed aside during his KPI sprint. Gavin opened his mouth, then shut it again, the color draining slowly from his face. I slung my bag over my shoulder, taking one last look at the red-soaked dashboard. "Systems don't lie," I added softly. And with that, I stepped away from the chaos he'd created all by himself. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 8 o'clock sharp, and even though I was no longer part of the firm's internal roster, professional protocol required me to attend the handoff. The conference room they chose wasn't the small glass box where Gavin had humiliated himself earlier in the week. It was the executive boardroom, the one reserved for moments too big to ignore, the kind with heavy doors, long tables, and a silence so dense it felt engineered. When I walked in, the room was already full. Representatives from several institutional clients sat stiffly on one side, faces unreadable, hands folded in front of them like judges waiting for testimony. On the other side, the firm's leadership looked rattled, trying their best to appear composed. Gavin was there too, pretending to be calm, his smile stretched too thin, like a balloon one good breath away from popping. I took my seat at the far end, present, but not involved. My role was simple: provide technical clarification, answer transition questions, make the process smooth. Nothing more, at least. That's how I expected it to go. The meeting began with the CEO clearing his throat, forcing a welcoming tone that didn't land. "Thank you all for coming. We understand there have been concerns. We're here to address them." One of the institutional clients didn't even wait for him to finish. "We'll keep it brief," she said. "We're transferring our assets." A flicker of panic crossed Gavin's face. "Yes." "Well, market volatility can cause emotional decisions," he began, voice too bright. "But rest assured, we're not leaving because of the market," another client interrupted. "We're leaving because Brock Mercer is leaving." The room shifted, chairs creaked, eyes turned toward me. Then, like a perfectly timed chorus, 3 more clients echoed the same line. Word for word. "We work with Brock Mercer, not this firm." The CEO blinked, stunned. Gavin's jaw hung loose, as if his mind couldn't process simple English. I felt something warm bloom in my chest, not pride. Exactly, but a deep satisfaction, the kind that comes from seeing truth step out of the shadows and stand on its own feet. Then came the real blow. One of the senior clients leaned forward, voice calm but cutting. "We're also leaving because your directory," nodded toward Gavin, "nearly cost us $40 million last year." You could feel the impact ripple through the room. Someone inhaled sharply. A pen dropped. Gavin went pale, the truth finally landing like the disaster he had tried so hard to forget. We stayed. The client continued. Only because Brock quietly fixed the mess. Your firm never acknowledged it. We did, and we don't intend to trust our assets to someone who treats competence as an inconvenience. Then, in a moment I'll never forget, the clients rose one by one and offered me their hands. Thank you, Brock, for saving us, for always being honest, for being the only reason we stayed as long as we did. Their gratitude wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The truth had finally spoken, and it spoke for me. The collapse didn't happen with sirens or alarms. It began quietly, almost politely, when the firm's internal dashboard refreshed at noon and revealed a number that froze the entire floor. Gavin's portfolio, once boasting $1 billion in assets under management, had plummeted to $190 million in less than 72 hours. It was the kind of freefall you usually read about in post-mortem industry reports, not watch unfold in real time, even from a distance. The panic rippling across the office was unmistakable. Analysts whispered. Managers stared at their screens with the dread of people witnessing an avalanche they could not outrun. I watched it all with a strange, steady detachment. Not satisfaction, at least not the loud, triumphant kind, but a colder recognition of inevitability. Actions have consequences. Gavin had spent years pretending he was exempt from them. The first domino fell when one of the firm's largest clients triggered a clause rarely invoked: a full-scale risk review. It was a nuclear option in the advisory world once activated. It required an external third-party audit of every decision, every adjustment, every ignored warning. Most directors went their entire careers without seeing it used. Gavin was about to see it dismantle his. The auditors arrived the next morning. Crisp suits, quiet efficiency, the kind of presence that makes guilty people sweat. They combed through months of system logs, trade orders, risk alerts, allocation shifts. It didn't take long. By mid-afternoon, they requested a private meeting with leadership. 30 minutes later, the CEO emerged looking 10 years older. The verdict was simple, devastating, and unmistakable. Gavin had manually dismissed risk warnings for multiple portfolios, warnings that could have triggered enormous losses if left unchecked. And worse, far worse for him, the logs clearly showed that someone else had stepped in afterward to correct the underlying issues. Someone who actually understood how the models worked, someone who didn't treat red flags like decorative suggestions. My name came up in every one of those corrections. The CEO found me in the hallway, his expression pale and tight, like a man realizing the foundation beneath him had been sand all along. Brock, you fixed these? I nodded once, calm, steady. If I hadn't, sir, you would have had lawsuits from every institutional client on that list. He closed his eyes, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. He didn't thank me. Not then. Shock leaves no room for gratitude. By the next morning, the board convened an emergency session. Their voices carried through the hallway, sharpened, urgent, unmistakably furious. I caught only fragments: negligence, liability, fiduciary breach, catastrophic exposure, words that cut careers cleanly in half. When they finally summoned Gavin, he walked past me with the shaky bravado of someone hoping confidence might disguise collapse. It didn't. His downfall wasn't loud. It was procedural, methodical, inevitable. A chain reaction triggered by his own carelessness, one I had prevented more times than he ever realized. And now, for the first time, the consequences belonged entirely to him. I'd just stepped out of the boardroom hallway when I heard hurried footsteps behind me, heavy, uneven, desperate, before I could turn. Gavin cut in front of me, blocking my path with an outstretched arm. His face was flushed, jaw clenched so tight the tendons stood out like cables. He tried to arrange his expression into something authoritative, but panic had already hollowed out his eyes. "You sabotaged me," he snapped, voice cracking halfway through the sentence. Brock, you destroyed my career for a moment." I simply looked at him. There was a time when those words might have stung, but not now. Not after everything that had surfaced, not after the clients had spoken with more honesty in 10 minutes than he had in 2 years. I felt the emotion rise in me, years of dismissal, buried work, quiet corrections, but instead of exploding outward, it solidified into something calmer, sharper. Justice doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers with precision. "I didn't sabotage you," I said quietly. "You did that yourself," he scoffed, shaking his head violently, as if denial could rewrite audit logs. "You're lying. You wanted my job. You wanted to make me look incompetent." Without a word, I reached into my folder and pulled out a printed email dated, time-stamped, system verified. I held it out between us. "This is the correction I submitted after you approved that rebalancing without reading it. You remember the one that almost cost $40 million in institutional funds?" His expression faltered. The confidence in his posture slipped. He barely glanced at the page before his eyes darted away, searching for an exit that didn't exist. "I covered for you," I continued, my voice steady but edged with the truth he'd spent years avoiding. "And I wasn't thanked, I wasn't acknowledged, but I did it anyway, because clients deserved better than your shortcuts." His lips trembled with the beginning of another accusation, something half-formed and desperate, but I cut in before he could spit it out. "You said I was replaceable," I reminded him softly. "You were right." I leaned in just enough for him to feel the weight of it. "I just replaced your entire book of business." The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, quiet, but impossible to ignore. He froze, truly froze. No bluster, no excuses. Just the dawning realization that everything slipping through his fingers had been his own doing. And that's when two security officers approached behind him. "Mr. Cross," one said, firm but polite, "the board has placed you on temporary suspension. We need you to come with us." Gavin's mouth opened in shock, but nothing came out. He looked at me one last time, not with anger, but with recognition. The truth had finally reached him. I stepped aside as they escorted him toward the elevator. Justice, at long last, had caught up. Walking into my new office felt like stepping into a different version of the world, one where the air wasn't thick with politics, where competence wasn't treated like an inconvenience, and where people didn't flinch when they saw a red alert on a dashboard. The space was bright, understated, and professional. No theatrics, no forced grandeur, just a firm that valued the work more than the noise around it. The transition team greeted me warmly. And within the first hour, the client migration reports came in. Page after page confirmed what I already sensed in the days leading up to this moment. Nearly every major institutional client had followed me here. Not because I asked, not because I promised them anything, but because trust, once earned honestly, tends to move on its own. Their portfolios complex, meticulous, deeply important were now under my care again, this time. In a place where risk alerts wouldn't be dismissed for the sake of quarterly vanity metrics, where responsibility wasn't a burden but a baseline expectation. As I settled in, the new CEO stopped by my office. He wasn't dramatic about it, just walked in with an easy confidence and handed me a folder. "We've reviewed your track record," he said, "and we'd like you to lead the division, Director of Institutional Portfolios." For a moment, the words hovered in the air. It was the exact role Gavin once bragged about being far above my level. The irony didn't sting. It simply landed with quiet symmetry, the way a final puzzle piece clicks into place after a long search. I accepted the offer with a steady nod. Nothing flamboyant, nothing loud, just a calm acknowledgement of a new beginning built on merit rather than proximity to power. Later, when the office finally grew quiet, I stood by the window, looking out over the city. The skyline stretched in clean lines, unbothered, unhurried, the kind of view that reminds you things have a way of correcting themselves when truth and time work together. I let a small, knowing smile form. I didn't seek revenge. I murmured to the glass, I just let the market choose the person it trusted. And in that soft reflection, with the weight finally lifted and my future aligned at last, I felt something simple and clear settle inside me, a victory not shouted, but earned. Real power isn't loud. It's the quiet confidence of knowing your work speaks for you long after the noise fades. If my story reminds you of your own battles for dignity, tell me, where are you listening from right now? And if you believe in stories that restore courage, I'd love for you to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Every action helps this community grow, and your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear today.